What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? I had brain surgery roughly 3 years ago. I lost my concept of time. What felt like 4 months was only 3 days. The amount of physical, mental, and emotional pain I went through was crazy. I had to find all of my memories and relearn how to walk, talk, everything. If you want to go through something terrifying, that is it. One day as a kid I was exploring the forests near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars. Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl. In that forest, a guy walking his dog found it. After the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater, while staring at the backpack. We stopped exploring the forests after. Edit. English is hard sometimes. This happened with my sister-in-law. When she was about 11 or 12, her and her family lived in a trailer park. Just down the street was her bus stop for school. Each morning, she would see a man in his trailer taking pictures of her and her friends. It creeped her out, so she went to tell her mom, my mother-in-law, of what this guy was doing and how he would just stand in the window staring at them and taking pictures. So, her mom calls the police and report him. The police didn't do anything. This went on for about another 2 weeks with no action from the police, to where now my sister-in-law is terrified to stand and wait for the school bus, and her mom had to call the police again. This time, the police actually arrived at this pervert's house, and lo and behold, the police find a wall covered in pictures of my sister-in-law, some of the other neighborhood little girls, and some child porn. Her and the other families watched from afar with this guy cuffed up and being escorted to the police cruiser. I'm a crime writer and once interviewed a woman who told me an unrelated horror story about something that happened to her as a girl. When she was like 10, she had trouble sleeping and imagined the boogeyman was living in her closet, staring at her during the night. Every night she would come down and tell her parents, and every night her father would tell her the boogeyman didn't exist and she should go back to bed. Well, this happened for several nights and the father got tired of it. So that night he walked her back to her bedroom, turned on the light, and said, "I'll show you there's no boogeyman," and went to open the closet door. But something on the other side held it shut. He sent his daughter out of the room and forced the door open to find that a man was inside. He'd been sneaking into their house every night to stand in the girl's closet and watch her. And maybe more. He beat the ever-loving shit out of the man, and the man went to prison. When I interviewed this woman, I looked him up online. He'd recently gotten out on parole and had skipped out on his weekly checks. There was a warrant out for his arrest and nobody knew where he was anymore. Edit. People are asking for the source. I googled his name for the first time in years, and, well, the good news is he's in prison again. When I was a little girl, 9 years old or thereabouts, I was playing at the school down the street from my house. It was the middle of summer and myself and a girlfriend were hanging around watching the boys play street hockey. One of the boys called my name and said a man in the parking lot was looking for me. The parking lot was mostly obscured by the building, but I could see an old 70s style van that hadn't been there earlier. I was walking over to the van when the mother of one of the other kids showed up looking for her son and asked me what I was doing. When I told her someone in the van was looking for me, she took my hand and started to walk with me, and the van pulled out and sped away. Friend's mom walked me home and I wasn't allowed out of my yard without my parents for the rest of the summer. I was so upset and didn't understand why I was being punished. It was only years later that I understood that I was likely being targeted by some opportunistic scumbag for who knows what. Thanks Mrs. Gibson. Wherever you are. Edited to add. Thanks for all the awards. Kind internet strangers. Just wanted to address a few FAQs. My parents didn't say they were punishing me. They just kept me close to the house. So I assumed that I was being punished. I lived in a very small, safe, we don't lock our doors town. Kids roamed the streets from sunup until sundown. Typically, playing in the old quarries and on railway tracks and on gigantic limestone hills and all kinds of shit we'd never let our kids do now. A few people were worried about Mrs. Gisbon's son. He was fine. We all were. She had come in from the other entrance to the schoolyard behind us, whereas the boys were closer to the parking lot. I barely got within shouting distance of the van before it sped off. Most kids are unfortunately abducted by people they know. So I have no way of knowing if it was some creep who knew me from all the activities my parents had us in or just some opportunist guy who said to the boy, "You know that girl over there? Can you call her over for me?" We were all taught about stranger danger. Shout out to Canadians who remember stay alert. Stay safe. And because Mrs. Gibson showed up, I'll never know if those lessons sunk in or not. Few years ago, I worked at a bar near a forested area. One day, it was like 10 p.m. and some random kid comes running in screaming and saying, "My mommy and daddy are trying to kill me." Shortly after, a woman and a man enter the bar, presumably his parents. They ask me if I saw where their son went. I said no and they exit, muttering to themselves. I call the police and they come like 13 minutes later. They search the area for the parents and take the kid with them. And that's all I remember. Edit. Typo. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake that is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. When I was about 5, woke up to my house surrounded by loud voices and bright white lights. A group of robbers broke into our house after some kind of heist and were using us as hostages with rifles. The police had our house surrounded. My parents, grandparents, and I didn't really speak English back then, so my 12-year-old sister had to translate the demands to the police and instructions to us. My grandma told me to go back to sleep, which I somehow easily did. Edit. The end of the story too. After falling asleep and waking up the next day, everything was fine. The only thing everyone kept talking about were where the robbers were standing. They decided not to have too many entrances from the house, so they barricaded themselves in our kitchen. Apparently the entire kitchen floor was covered in guns. I kept asking what happened, but my family was firmly in the mindset of, "Don't tell the kids anything. Ever." Since little kid me was kind of dumb and nothing really happened to me directly. I forgot about the situation for years. I asked again but they still don't want to talk about it. It's still kind of scary to think that, had they wanted to, I could have died in my sleep that night. A kid from a couple towns away from me lived on a farm with his girlfriend. They were in the kitchen one night. She was cooking and him and his friend were cleaning their guns at the table. His went off and shot her, killing her immediately. He then loaded up, ran outside and shot himself in the head. Short story. My wife is from Enterprise. OR and I guess a kid in her school got beheaded on his way home. Was literally found with his head cut off on the side of the street, and to this day no one knows who did it or how it happened. Absolutely gives me chills. This week in Cologne. From the wall next to Autobahn, a concrete plate fell down into ongoing traffic and hit one car, killing the driver. After the inspection, they found another 6 plates that weren't properly constructed, just like the one that fell down. When I was a kid we lived on a large acreage. One night we came home late and as we entered the driveway we noticed a car pulled over down the road against the ditch that bordered our property. We saw 2 people, one of them climbing out of the ditch. When we parked my mom told my dad to go see if they were okay or needed help. My dad said that they looked to be okay and it was probably not a good idea, so we all went in and to bed. The next morning we were woken up by the police. They had our whole yard taped off because some horseback riders had noticed a leg sticking out of a black plastic bag in the ditch exactly where that car was parked. That look on my mom's face I'll never forget. We know for sure my dad wouldn't have made it back home alive if he had listened to my mom that night. I think the story of Tina Fey getting the scare on her face is super fucked up. She was a kid just sitting and playing in her front yard when a random guy pulled up, got out of his car and slashed her face for no reason with a razor. WTF. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife.